Thank you very much for the invitation. John Curtis and Astrid, who has been really running the show from behind the scenes, at least as far as my coming here is concerned. I'm delighted to be here in the company of three chefs, founders of great restaurants. I'm new to London. I'm just discovering these places. And today, I pulled up all three restaurants in my undergraduate class and showed them what they should go eat. And they seem to be heading that way. So the program is, I will leave our conversation for when we all sit down together as a panelist group. But what I had intended to do was to introduce to you something of a bit of a historical perspective to the question of Persian food without getting too heavy-handed with the academic side of it, which is where I go usually. So I wanted to start with this glazed bowl. It's not a very deep one. It's blue and white of the Sultanabad technique or style, and of the 14th century date. It is inscribed in a rough hand in brownish black, and it reads, and I know many of you have already deciphered this, or maybe I have gotten it wrong, you can correct me at the end. But it reads, and I quote, "As long as the soup is good, do not worry if the bowl is pretty." This sort of evidence, which I'm chasing around, if you will, through objects, through paintings, and through cookbooks, largely from 16th and 17th centuries, but this one is a particularly good one for a starting point. This I see as a process of trying to tease out of the evidence, material or written, what might be a sense of the way in which knowledge about food, cooking, technologies of cooking, ways of serving, ways of eating were transmitted as memories, as techniques, but also popularized. The evidence tends to be at the level of the court or the elite, if you will, of the Safavid period. But certainly I'm hoping that our panelists would shed light on how they learned of their own experience of eating food and cooking. We all attribute all of this to our parents, the mother, of course. But that is only part of the story, as it were. So I look at Safavid cookery books, and I have an implement here that is supposed to help me move things forward. A Safavid, or two Safavid cookery books. One is called Khaname dar bab tabakhi va san'at an, which dates to 1521. It was written by a Haj Muhammad Ali Bawarchi Baghdadi, who was in the employ of some courtier, we don't know who, but some courtier in the time of Shah Ismail. The other one is called Madat al-Hayat Risale dar Ilm Tabakhi, and that one is written by a Nurullah, whom we understand to have been the personal chef, the ashpaz, of Shah Abbas the Great. These sources, written and otherwise, to which I come back in a little bit before I finish, and the objects and paintings that depict the ceremonies of eating, feasting, banquets, ziyafat as it were, they together seem to point to an interdependence of sensory experiences. So what you eat, what you see, how it feels to the touch, how it is served, all of these seem to be very tightly knit. In a historical context, we think that we do it out of habit, but they have instructions for how to prepare, how to present, what the food is supposed to look at, as early as at least 16th century. There are, of course, earlier cookbooks, for instance, from Abbasid Baghdad, and they have been studied, and they most likely have been influenced greatly by the cooking traditions, the cookery that comes out of a courtly environment of Iran before the arrival of Islam as well. In any case, what I'm referring to is this notion of a transmission of the idea of what food is supposed to look like, how it is supposed to taste, how it is supposed to be delivered, on what kinds of dishes, but also how it translates, or it becomes the vehicle through which one might actually get a sense for the way seeing and tasting, two of the major sensory instruments at our disposal, are interconnected. So they lead to a sense of beauty. There's something about food and its presentation and taste that links us to a taste in visual terms in the Persian cultural scene. So with that in mind, I want to point out here to the fact that we know a great deal about the way in which food was presented at these courts, especially of the period of Shah Abbas in Isfahan, which is the area I have worked mostly. So for instance, travelers, European travelers, describe feasting scenes at the Chehel Sutun Palace, or at the talar of it, or inside in the audience hall, or at Ayna Khane, which no longer stands and used to be by the Zayande River, overlooking the river. And there they describe how incredibly ceremonial the format was, and how these diplomatic missions were received, and how the imperial affairs were conducted as part of the banqueting. So the banqueting was about politics. It had a conception of the empire built into it. So it was very carefully codified. And we know that, for instance, the meals began in these feasts with what Europeans actually thought to be desserts. They were rather surprised to be first served candied and fresh fruits. We all know eating fruits before the meal is the strangest thing Iranians do, especially the cucumber with salt on it. But they were served candied and fresh fruits, sweetbreads and pastries, and cool sherbets, which were presented in large gold, wooden, or ceramic dishes and bowls. So the bowl at the bottom left is one of these kinds of vessels. They were served over richly decorated silk spreads, sofre, and they were set out as starters, essentially. Wine was served at the discretion of the Shah. So we know that the Shah would say, bring the wine or stop the wine, and then handing a cup of wine would have been the greatest expression of favor to the person who was receiving. A morsel of food or a little cup of wine was the greatest honor bestowed on the guests. Of course, that's if the Shah was not refraining from alcohol, either on doctor's advice or out of repentance, in which case nobody was allowed to drink wine either. The master of ceremonies offered wine on his command, and further heightened this notion of a bestowal of generosity and favor. Europeans also tell us about the abundance of it and abundance of food, which was then followed by all kinds of courses of food, each of which distinct in the way in which, for instance, rice dishes were brought or meat dishes were brought. None of them completely together or mushed up, if you will, as one of these family gatherings that I host myself, but rather course by course, extremely refined method of presentation of the food, which was noted by all the Europeans. They also talk about how these vast ceramic dishes, not porcelain, but ceramic dishes. In other words, these were not true Chinese porcelain, but Persian made examples of blue and white, which were wide dishes, as you see in this image, with a lid on top. You would have had the lid on top of the dish to keep the food from getting cold, but also to create that visual effect of the shimmering of gold and silver lids on top of these dishes. And that they would be brought in rows and rows of pages who would carry them. These kinds of ceremonials, which relate to the eating habits of the Persians in the context of the Safavid period, were also represented as part of a larger entertainment activity. In other words, the entire feasting around, for instance, hosting of a deposed ruler from an Uzbek deposed ruler was depicted as a feast whereby the Shah is granting some privileges to this deposed ruler, including giving him shelter. So banqueting, feasting as a tool for the political ends of the imperial posture. These representations spread in a large number of manuscripts of all kinds of literary texts, from the Shahnames to Falnames, from Mantarote to Khamsa of Nizami, and across the entire 16th century particularly, where you find depictions of food-related activities in these paintings also proliferating. So what I'm suggesting is, contrary to the visual representations or production of codified scenes that we see in the 16th and 17th centuries, the earlier periods tend to be thin in those regards. So this is really a moment of codification of the idea of a Persian feast. To this, one can add also the objects themselves. So to look at, for instance, the variety of dishes. In this case, you see dishes prepared or ready to be filled as the kebab finishes and the cook has just tasted the stew. These are very distinctive aspects of Persian painting, which point in the 16th and 17th centuries to the notion of food and cuisine as a transmitter of cultural memory, of knowledge actually, and very much a matter of urban consumption. The food material and food production, like the noodle making in this instance, or these women and their attendants busy cooking what might be ash in most instances, all of that is also accompanied, this kind of proliferation of images is also accompanied, I got carried away with the proliferation of images, is accompanied by objects of which hundreds exist in these stacks and stacks of dishes and bowls and cups and so forth, which come to us primarily from 16th and 17th centuries Safavid period. And if you go to the V&A's top floor, where there is dense display of these objects, one thing that I would encourage you to look at is the distinctive way in which large platters tend to be numerous in the Safavid or Persian side of the cases, and deep, large bowls tend to be mostly of the Ottoman ones. Little cups for drinking wine, or they fit into the palm of the hand, or maybe coffee, and wine bottles, of which great numbers exist from Safavid Iran, very few from Ottoman Istanbul, for instance. So you have a distinction also coming through by the shapes and the functions of such objects as are now detached from the place of their production, but certainly telling of preferences in foods and in particular ways of feasting together. The distinction of the Iranian practice is in the fact that Safavid Shahs held feasts that they were the host of. In other words, a personal hosting of a huge feast. The Ottoman sultans never ate together with the guests. It was always eating alone in isolation. And this notion of availability, proximity, access through food and feasting is one that distinguishes the Safavid practice, in large part related to a number of different religious and imperial ideas, and going back to such notions as we know from the Shahnameh, as in the case of the Bazm, as pairing of warriorship and feasting as attributes of the king. So with that in mind, I want to also say something about the fact that these cookbooks tend to tell us something about what is the food scene, so to speak. From the treatise by Haji Muhammad Ali Bawarchi, that chef of the household of the Safavid courtier, we know that rice dishes were particularly important. You take that for granted nowadays, but this was a brand new emergence in the 16th and 17th centuries. Rice was eaten widely in China, Southeast Asia, India, and Iran, but in Iran, it never was the staple food. It never was the ordinary food. It was always the extraordinary food. And the descriptions of the feast tell us that the rice dishes came en masse as one course of the feast, not as something that you put khoresh on, the stew on, but as something distinct on its own. And for those, we should assume that these large platters, which are very, very distinctive in Persian cooking, were produced actually. So unlike Chinese who eat rice in small bowls, Iranians ate rice in these massive platters. Not one person per platter, of course, but you get the point. That was the way you presented it. Presentation was part of the deal. So this cook says in his book, talking about a black rice, he calls it siyah polo, that the rice should be colorfully composed on the platter with برنج رنگین کود در پای او باید نهاد باقی مساله, other goodies that goes with this black rice, را پهلوی یکدیگر باید گنجاند, and then he specifies how the cook must compose the dish and put it on a specific kind of platter, which tends to be the blue and white. He calls it chini. And then how the platter should be topped by this large domical lid that I was mentioning, and the whole thing should be carried to the sofre so carefully as nothing would move out of place. It's that kind of a precision of how you put this whole thing together for presentation of the food. And that he adds that the person who cooked the dish, this is for our chefs, the person who cooked the dish must serve it as he alone knows how he has placed the different parts of the food, and that when serving he knows how to reassemble the food on individual platters for different guests. His concern with proper composition of a dish for presentation purposes, and his insistence that the person who assembled the dish should disassemble and distribute the food so that it maintains its visual, textural, but also the gustatory integrity of the food. This is really important. He ties them all together. And his reference to platters, component parts, carriage, all of that tells us that there was a tremendously high degree of choreography in food presentation, if not preparation. Something that is truly involved with, committed to the aesthetics of it, to the beauty aspect of it. That sort of sensibility also comes through from Nurullah, the personal chef of Shah Abbas, who records a staggering range of rice dishes. They really are almost impossible to keep up with. And these are his innovations. This is an indication of these rice dishes having been invented at this period in relation to the particular ways of eating food. I keep that slide for the short bit that is remaining. And that this kind of an emphasis on the diversity of the rice dishes is something that Nurullah is particularly good at. And he says in his treatise that his motto is that the art of cooking, san'at tabakhi, requires the ability to cook well with speed and agility. He says, وَالسَّنْعَةَ تَبَّاخ جَلْدِي و جَسْتِي و خوب طبخ نمودن است. And then he goes on to scold those chefs who advise their apprentices in what he says, و استادان در کشیدن طعام اقراق نموده گفتن بپز و خوب بکش. Cook badly but serve beautifully. He scolds those chefs who tell their apprentices to ignore the taste as long as it looks beautiful. This disdain, this apparent disdain for the exaggerated emphasis on the serving style or the look of the food over its taste is significant, not just because it emphasizes the taste factor, that gustatory taste factor, but also, and perhaps more importantly, as far as I'm concerned, it points indirectly to the rise in the affectations in the manner of presenting. In other words, presentation had become an important part of the experience of food. And one can suggest the representation of the food in paintings as well. These, in other words, I take to be glimpses, intriguing glimpses, into the ways in which Persian society had begun to not only invent new dishes that looked good, tasted good, were complicated, and made the assembly, the feast, really special, but it was also part of the codification of dimensions of taste that go between tasting with your taste buds and tasting through your eyes and seeing and actually eating as one and the same processes of sensory experience. On that point, I thank you for being patient. I want to now invite our panelists to speak about taste and food. Thank you. Our panelists have been wonderfully preparing to treat us to some great examples of their food, but also they have been thinking about the subject of food as a matter of a practice, a kind of a cultural identity, if you will, right? Am I correctly thinking about it?
Yeah.
That they have also been asked to think in terms of what they cook, what it looks like, how they present it, how they have come to think in terms of their place in this long tradition, as it must be evident to all of us. We tend to think about antiquities, but there are moments in the history of Iran that very clearly point to the emergence of certain kinds of food, certain habits of presentation, and so forth. So, would you like to pick up on the subject? Any one of you wishes to start?
I'll start. I think the sort of representation of Persian food has changed an awful lot over the years, and I think it's had to be that way, mainly because Persian food was very much unknown to the Western world. So as a food operator, or as someone that from a corporate financial background decided to approach introducing Persian food to sort of the Western world, we had to look at it about how we would introduce a cuisine that was fairly unknown, and how we would maintain that authenticity while presenting it in a modern way. And I think all of us here have approached it authentically, but we've certainly put a modern spin on it in terms of adapting to what consumers want every day for their lunch or for their dinner. And we've had to do that, bearing in mind that people are very much time conscious, and they're very much, you know, they have a lot of choice, and they need to be educated, but educated through the palate. And where that balancing act happens between educating them, I guess, about the historic nature of where Persian food comes from, or whether it is disguising the secret that we have, which is a jewel of a cuisine, and intriguing them through whether we're introducing it as something healthy or affordable or quick, and then surprising them when they taste it.
I agree.
Yeah, please carry on.
For me, from my perspective, I work with Noosh and my family. We run a street food stall in Hackney, and we run on Sunday, so it's a very different kind of atmosphere from the West London restaurants, Persian restaurants that you'd go to. It's very fast, it's very quick, and people see our food in a line with all this other food from all these different countries, and they have to make that quick decision as to whether they want to take a bet and go with Iranian food or not. And so for us, it's we've found that whenever my dad is cooking up some lovely lamb or some saffron chicken, that's what gets people coming to the store. They smell that food, they see that food. And then the big jewel for us is our cuckoo. It sits on this lovely stand, it's really beautiful, and everyone comes up and they're, what is that? And they're just so amazed by this green kind of souffle, frittata looking thing with all these jewels on the top and walnuts. So that's how we try and entice them with the look, and then obviously the smells. And then once they've tried the food for them, it's always something they just come back for again. And it's so unexpected, I think. I think Persian food for them is something that they would imagine is a bit like Indian cuisine. It's probably spicy hot and, you know, all like curries. And sometimes if you look at the khoresh and the stews that we serve, they may look a bit like that, but as soon as you taste them, there's something else. And so we were quite worried initially when we first started as to whether people would even want to try the food. By looking at it, would it be enough? So we would give out samples, but we realized that the majority, 99.9% of people, immediately would try it and say, yes, give me more of that, whatever that was, I'll have more. And so now we've started to entice more people in, and we found that people do recognize the food, and they recognize a cuckoo now, and they tell us what it is, or they'll tell their friends what that is, and then they try and find, you know, all the Shirazi salads and the mostokhiyar that we make and things. So yeah, for us it's been very much about, like you said, educating, but also trying to entice them in and trying to get them to, you know, see our food first, and then take that leap to trying it.
And both of you are talking about how you use the look of the food actually as a way of enticing people to come in. If you go onto their websites, you really do get that picture of beautiful looking food that, whether you have tried it or not, is going to be attractive in some ways. And then the smell, in other words, trying to attack with all the senses, or as many senses as possible, short of touching the food. I take it.
Yeah.
Right, I totally agree with Vida. Basically, I've grown up in a family who has always been involved in the restaurant business. And so for us, there was always a question when I was in Iran, that why the Iranian cuisine are not very popular and not very recognized in Western countries. Yeah. So when I came here in 2008, so it was, I recognized as very confusing for most of the people, the British audience here. What is the difference between an Iranian cuisine and a Middle Eastern one? So Middle Eastern one obviously is a broader term than Iranian cuisine, and so, but there are definitely differentiation between these two. I remember when I was in college, we were preparing a marketing plan for establishing Iranian restaurants in London, and surprisingly, I had 6 teammates from different countries, and their knowledge about Iranian cuisine was very, very limited. Our approach regarding the food, as you said, so it's always about the, the shape and the look of the food. However, we also considered about the taste, because we believe there's kind of wrong understanding about Iranian cuisine, that usually people consider it as like a massive portion of rice and kebabs, which was one of the Iranian cuisine. But there are many other Iranian cuisine in the country, and that we need to look at them. And we can find those food like in our mom's kitchens. And so what we try to do as a team, so with my wife, Negar, and Arash, our chef, so we try to bring those recipes that they look nice and they taste properly to our kitchen. And I think, as you said, it was a barrier just to encourage people to come in and try the Iranian foods. But when they came in and when they tried, they loved it. Right. And we tried to adapt ourselves with the British audience expectation, what exactly they're looking for, while we were loyal to the originality of our Iranian cuisine.
So can I ask, thank you for all three of you confirming what seems to be the fact that you are conscious of the authenticity, but also of the new environment, the clients, the sort of health consciousness, no chelo kebab, any self-respecting person concerned with health would eat a big chelo kebab at night, I imagine. But although it's a great thing, or on Friday having a chelo kebab and then passing out in front of a football game, as I remember growing up doing on Fridays. But I wanted to ask, how do you see yourselves beyond these as being innovators? How do you invent things? Because that is also part of what you're doing. I saw cuckoo with cranberries, for instance.
That's us.
You will taste it. That's you, right?
Yeah.
But I think all of you have gone into this process of thinking, how do I reinvent without losing that authentic taste, right? You still have to be satisfied with the taste of fesenjan, no matter what you do with it. Otherwise, it's not fesenjan, right? Or it's not cuckoo.
Well, on that note, when we first started Noosh, one of our signature dishes that everyone used to ask us for and come and look at was, we did a deconstructed fesenjan, really. It was with lamb rather than chicken, which is a big no-no in Iran. But we thought we'd try it out because people always ask for lamb. And at first they used to say, are you the lamb stall? That's all they cared about. Are you selling lamb? And then it got to the point where they'd look at it, because my dad would be cooking it up, and they'd see this food, and they'd just think, what is it? Is it liver? Because it's all marinated in, you know, the walnuts and the pomegranate molasses. And they just couldn't work out what it was. And so as soon as they tried it, they were just, what is this? And this kind of amazing feast, really. And so unique to Iran in a way, because they hadn't ever tasted anything like that before, and it wasn't what they were expecting, that kind of sweetness with a sour kind of element of the pomegranate. And then another dish that we do, which again is a bit of an experiment, was Persian lamb burger, we call it. But again, it's that street food, you know, how the street food craze has taken over London, and people want fast food, but nice and quality, and again, keeping the authenticity there. We produced this lamb burger, and it's got mosso khiyar inside, it's got somar, it's got some sumac in it, and it's got khiyar shur, and so it's very Iranian, almost a bit like a kebab digi that we would cook at home, but served in some Bahbari bread and with some special sauce that my dad makes, that we don't give away the recipe. And then that is what people come back for, and they love it. And you wouldn't believe the queues we have for these Persian burgers. It's insane. So yeah, that kind of exactly, you wouldn't imagine it, would you? But then saying that, I lived in Iran for a few years when I was a teenager, and seeing and not having experienced Iran before that, and being a teenager who hadn't ever learned how to speak Farsi, and so didn't really know that much about Iran. When I went to Iran and had to learn the language and get to know the country, I realized that obviously food was a big thing. I knew that from living in England before, but seeing it there was another thing altogether. And then seeing the fast food industry too, and seeing how burgers and pizzas and Iran's take on those things were quite, I know it's not the food that you were showing earlier, but it's still that kind of modern take, and that kind of the cross between Western and Eastern food. So although we definitely try to stay authentic, and we have lots of authentic dishes like zerish polo and saffron chicken and things like that, we still try to experiment a little bit as well.
If I may just add to that one, your description of the Persian lamb burger reminds me of a kebab place in Tajrish, where you would get it with bread and rayhoon, the basil, and you would get the extras of onions and,
that's like us,
pickles and whatnot. So it's not a question of what is authentic, what is not. It's a question of all of this is authentic. Of course it is authentic. who says what defines authenticity to begin with? You define it now. You define what is authentic in Persian cuisine. But that you reinvent and capitalize on these incredible combinations of ingredients, cooked and uncooked, is really what's the issue here, that inventiveness, which distinguishes this new craze that comes with people like you guys coming onto this scene with this sort of creative approach. I must say, my experience of Persian food is from the States, and that is not much to speak of, I must say. So I'm really, really thrilled to see this kind of a push into a new direction, a young and authentic and adventurous approach to food. Adventurous is the other part of it, no? What do you think?
That's correct. I think this is very important to understand exactly what are the expectations like in the market. For us, because we found people are very health conscious these days, they want to have healthy foods. So, and to the surprise of all of us, so Iranian cuisine, they are very healthy in many aspects. The gluten-free items, the foods full of fruits and vegetables. So these are the things that the people are unaware of them. So to me, reinventing and being a bit adventurous about it is just to create new recipes, which could introduce the recipes that we had in Iran, like in a different way. For example, one of our signature dishes is tagine. So we know all that tagine is a food that we usually have it in Iran with chicken. But the way that we did to meet the expectation was, okay, so people are more health conscious and they want the vegetable vegetable options. So we tried to do the tagine with aubergine, and it was a quite success. Or, for example, if you have quiche, so the ingredients that we experiment and try to be more adventurous with the quiche are different from what you find like in a recipe book or in a cookbook. But again, it was a success. We explore, we try to be more adventurous, and it answered well. So, and the response from the customer is that, okay, they love it. So I think that's the most important part to understand and educate people about that. And what is important that all of us needs to know exactly about the recipes in details ourselves in a way that we can explain to the customers as well. Because if, as a presenter, if we cannot explain exactly what we are offering to the customer, because we had the same issue in Iran, so we have a restaurant in Iran for 30 years, and still, like for example, the waiters in the restaurant, they are not able to explain what are the foods and what it is made from. But here, people are quite interested to understand exactly, and they are trying to be more adventurous. So if you tell them in a nice way and with all the knowledge that, okay, what is a food, or what is the ingredients, so they are very happy to try that.
Is it not unlike what Babaie tells us, that he goes and serves it so that he does exactly, he knows. He says the cook should serve, right? It's that kind of a thing. Of course, you have to ask the servers to know it too.
Yeah, I mean, for us, I mean, the sort of modern consumer's focus on nutrition and healthy eating has meant that there's been a real shift in terms of deconstructing and reworking the recipes to sort of move away from the animal fat side, move towards, healthier cooking. Khoresh typically had a lot of oil. That's no longer the case. And for us, it was really about analysing, I guess, moving away from the sort of Safavid era in the sense of the sort of large amounts of rice that were being served and focusing on portion sizes, so that, as you said before about chela kebab and feeling heavy after food, that you actually, we spent a lot of time looking at portion control and balancing the food in different dishes so that actually people could come in at lunch and not feel heavy no matter what selection of food they were putting together. So we spent a lot of time on that.
In defense of the Safavids, those big platters of rice were for 300 people.
That's true. But that
many platters of rice.
That continued for a long time.
But actually we don't see them as fat people. Except for the few very well-fed ones. In other words, the point is that an authentic cuisine is developed over centuries. So it really is trial and error, and the best survive.
Yeah.
And the ones that are particularly difficult or not so healthy die out, actually. And that's what makes these particular dishes that all three restaurants you guys have chosen so important, because they really are the survivors of this historical transformation in so many ways as well.
I mean, looking at the history side of things as well, my mother's English and my father's Iranian, and so when my mum went to Iran, she was learning how to cook Iranian food firsthand from my great-grandmother, and they couldn't speak the same language, so one was talking Farsi, one was talking English. The kitchen was where they bonded, and those recipes were handed down.
Right.
And so I've just got amazing fond memories of my mum and my grandmother and all my aunties and cousins cooking in the kitchen. I saw a photo on Instagram the other day of my cousins in Isfahan, and they were all in the kitchen again, and I just miss that feeling of seeing everyone there cooking up and giving each other tips on how to serve this, and oh no, we don't do that anymore, we do this, and it's bringing those elements into our cooking as well. And I find you don't get that in those West London restaurants. You know, you do have the cello kebab, you get all the classics, but you don't get those kind of little secret recipes or those little experiments that you might have at home. And so I find that's what you get more with the kind of modern side of the food that you can get now.
I think the exciting thing about Persian food is that really it's a communal food, both in terms of prepping and cooking, but also in terms of enjoying with people. And you know, it's a nostalgia food, because as you said, it's age-old recipes that have been passed down. And it's not elitist as a cuisine. I think the social sort of differentiators that were historically there have now become simplified, and you know, that's been deconstructed, and you know, you have the sort of, you still have the sort of village peasant influences that are still coming through and becoming more prevalent. Even in high-end restaurants, people want flatbread as an accompaniment to their meal. So those sort of boundaries have been blurred, and I think that's exciting for us, because it's sort of enabling the cuisine to be more accessible to mass audience.
And one that is not knowledgeable necessarily of this sort of. So how do Iranians respond to your cooking and serving and portion sizes and all that?
Very well.
You talked a lot about the English, but
for us, I think it's about 5% of our customers are Iranians. So what we expect to have more Iranian customers.
Yeah, this audience hopefully.
And to be honest, we have responsibility about the size and portion of the food. That okay, always not enough. So, but we always try just to understand, okay, who is the customer. So we just try to be flexible with that one. So obviously, when we have Iranian customers, we try to put more people.
Iranian portions.
Yes, of course. And
that's not fair, though.
no, but I mean, it should be, because, for example, sometimes we're serving like zeresh polo and chicken, like it's one of our main dishes per week. And so obviously we put barberries on the top, but you know, the barberries is like a delicacy and it's quite expensive here. I mean, the amount that we put, like for a non-Iranian customers might be different from the Iranian ones. Because we know at some point if we put like the same portion that we put for like a non-Iranian customer, so it might be a bit insulting to them. Okay, what is that? So this is not enough barberries on the top. But I think that's the way. So we need just to adjust ourselves and adapt ourselves to the customers. And
I think for Noosh, we found a whole community of Iranians that we weren't necessarily part of before we started Noosh. And through social media, through the website, and through articles that we've had here and there, people seem to come from quite far away, and they tell us when they arrive that we've been traveling for 3 hours, and we've got to you, and we really want to try your food, and it's all very passionate, and it's lovely. And it's always so nice to hear what they think about it as well. Yeah, just to see, oh, look at the cuckoo, it looks so pretty, or trying the different dishes, and some of them said they haven't had anything like that for a while. So it's been really nice to get that Iranian reception as well, and to see and to meet new people. I think there's quite a nice, not just us, but there's more of a community on social media as well now. So
do you get advice?
We kind of seem to stick together and give other people advice sometimes when they want it, I've found, or yeah, there seems to be a lot of, there was a recipe giveaway as well. I think it started in America, and all Iranian bloggers gave away recipes to, about 20 or 40 recipes were collected together, and it became a bit of a free giveaway. So things like that have started to develop online too, which I think is really big, and you can really share the food and the look of the food online quite easily. It's very, and you only have to type in Persian food into Instagram as a hashtag just to see how much food and how Iranians take photos of their food here, Iran, America. They love it. So yeah, it's good.
Yeah. No, I mean, customer acceptance has been unbelievable since we started. We started 7 months ago, and our target audience wasn't Persian, actually, just because we were based in the city, and you know, we really want to have to cater to all sorts of tastes, and we had, you know, Persians coming from all over, having seen articles, and very constructive feedback. People that would walk by, see a board outside that had osh, and they would run in not knowing that obviously Dindin Kitchen doesn't sound Persian, like, do you serve osh? And that sort of excitement would then spread, and through word of mouth, and people would start coming.
It's like pilgrimage, isn't it?
It is.
Yeah. And then also, how many people who are associated with Iran, who maybe have worked there or lived there before but aren't Iranian, come over too and say, hey, it's been years since I've had tahdig. And so we always give them the bit of tahdig at the end, and if you give that to a Westerner, they look at you, what is that bit of burnt rice you're giving me? But, you know, Iranians really appreciate that crispy bit.
I paid for proper rice.
Yeah. So we save that for our special people.
Yeah, but this notion of Iranian food suddenly popping up somewhere where you don't expect it, and for Iranians it's like, you know, you suddenly see your family there. Yeah. My son sent me an image recently from Auburn, Alabama, there was a food truck and had an Iranian soup written on it. He was serving osh, and evidently not an Iranian, but somebody caught on to the idea that osh is a good thing, and presented there. So this was presented to me as a great, you know, new thing on the board. Yeah, how exciting is this?
I think I'm one of those people. Whenever I see anything Iranian, I'm like texting my mum and dad, look, there's a new one here, there's a new one there. Yeah, it's just part of being Iranian.
Do you want to add anything before we open to the audience for question and answer? Do you have something burning on your mind you wish to say?
For me, it's more just the street food side of things, just linking it back to what I experienced when I was in Iran and seeing what they sold in, say, the mountain cafes and things like that, which I wouldn't have known about until I went there, and just the fresh pomegranate juice that they give you in the mountains in Dalakeh, for instance, or the corn on the cob that you get on the side of the roads, the fresh corn on the cob. That's just those kind of things. I feel are the little elements that we want to try and bring back and for people to experience and see that side, or the fresh fruit juice stalls that are in Valias, for instance, or you know, the Persian ice cream and faluda as well, and things like that. So those little elements for me are things that I think we're going to look at in the future as well, a bit more, and try and experiment on that side.
And I also think there's a lot that can be done as a collective.
Definitely.
I think today is a great showcase, really, for where Persian food has moved to. And I think, you know, together we can really make huge impact.
I agree.
And there's certainly the sort of the press feedback and the customer acceptance in the last 12 months, I think, across the UK has been huge.
Yeah.
So I think it's really a fantastic platform to move forward.
For me, I think from the time that we started, like in 2012 so far, thanks to like other market players, there's a lot of change in the perception about Iranian cuisine. But I still think there's a lot of room for improvement and introducing Iranian cuisine. There's a couple of issues that I think we need to address and we need to take care of them. I think we need to change the perception about Iranian cuisine, so which is always, usually, not always, so larger portions, lower prices. You know. I think there is a room for us just to go to that side for the fine dining, for the fine Persian cuisine, and we can introduce that. So London is a great place to do that, and I think there are other nationalities in the world, they have introduced Michelin star restaurants. And I think there is definitely an opportunity for like some players, if they come with the right business model and concept in the market, to introduce such a business. to do that, I think we also need to improve our knowledge about Iranian cuisine, like not only the chili kebab and the regional cuisine in Iran. To me, if you go to Italy and if you go to Milan and ask about like the Tuscan food, they know. But if you go to Tehran and if you ask someone about what is the main dish in Ilam's province and what is the delicacy in Kurdistan, I doubt any person knows. And so that is the part that we need to work on that. If we can leverage our knowledge about Iranian cuisine, definitely we can meet these expectations. We can go to the place that we deserve.
I was surprised to receive an email today for a Gilan-style supper club.
Yes, it's from us.
Exactly. And I think that's a very, itself a very interesting and ripe, to use a food pun, a ripe area for development. Not only Iranian cuisine, as if there is something uniquely Tehran-based kind of a food, as we tend to do, collapsing everything into what is understood to be coming out of the center, but actually experimenting with these regional foods. And I think one of the great things in Iran, some years ago, I traveled with a group of Americans, and the thing that really struck them was the different ways ghormeh sabzi is cooked in different regions of Iran, and the very different kinds of sweets that Iranians have. So you don't find, well, everything is found in Tehran, but what is in Yazd is different from what is in Esfahan, from what's in Kermanshah, and so forth. And that seems to be losing its hold, and it's really something that one hopes new ventures like these very smart, thoughtful, conscientious, responsible approaches to food of Iran will bring back to life. That you would begin to, for instance, note that there are certain dishes that are regionally specific and represent the diversity of Iran, which is the diversity of its climate, actually, and its food production, and has a historical root. And I think that is a very promising aspect, in addition to the way in which you are transforming expectations, both of Iranians and of the British. May your businesses become multinationals at some point, be all over the place. So on that, I wonder if the audience has any questions, please.
Yeah. As a tourist going around Iran a few years ago now, and talking to a girlfriend who came back from Iran a couple of months ago, it's a little difficult if you're a vegetarian to travel around Iran, and I wondered what your take is as far as, yes, of course we have vegetables, and we can also give you lamb to go with it. What's your take on the fact that there are people who don't eat meat?
Yeah, right. For me, we always have the vegetarian option. So tonight we've got the cuckoo, that is our vegetarian option. But we also serve Shirazi salad, mostel khiyar as well, so the yogurt dip, and bread. And so we try and have that option. But things like barley bator would work really well, egg, you know, and that kind of gorgeous broad beans. Or we've got had adas polo, so they could have that with the rice, with the salads. And so we try and be quite flexible for our customers, but I understand that meat is usually king, isn't it?
I think travelers are out of luck in Iran because restaurant food and hotels that serve Westerners tend to have only a limited range. I think I must have gotten sick of super joe so many times. It's the thing that starts everything. And then comes juje kebab, of course, which is great, but you know, it's the thing that travelers get. It's the home-cooked food that is the source of the diversities. And that's what you're referring to, that you guys, you look into the home-cooked, your mothers and grandmothers, and your dads, in your case, as well.
And mom.
And your mom, of course. But the point is that you do look into non-restaurant sources of food production.
That's really my only vision of Iranian food. Is the only experience I've got is the home cooked.
Yeah.
In Iran we didn't really go to that many Iranian restaurants. Of course we'd go for the chela kebabs, and we'd have to do that, or dizzy, for instance, in places. But it was always about the home cooked cuisine and serving over 100 people at dinner parties, and having that variety, having that sofra, that really big table full of all these different types of food. And so you would be able to always find something that was vegetarian, or for me I'm lactose intolerant, so for me it's always trying to find something without yogurt or butter in, but it can be done. But
I mean, Persian food has one of the biggest representations of vegetarian food. At dinner we have always a selection of vegetarian meze, vegetarian soups, stews, rice dishes. Meat was an expensive item, now less so people use it in many dishes, but there is a huge representation of vegetarian food. Vegan is more difficult, but we have to cater to that too, because that's very much in vogue at the moment. So.
I have two quick questions, one from our panelist who's been operating in Iran, and one from Vida. Food like language evolves over time and over coming in contact with other civilizations.
Sure.
And my question to you is food evolving in Iran? Is the food that came to my mother's table 30 years ago, or my grandmother's 50, does it look different today in Iran? And is the concept of eating lunch at home and cooking and spending that family time together in the kitchen was deep in our culture. Have times changed that? And are we moving into more a fast food, new type of food situation in Iran? And for Vida, have you ever asked the question, why is it, for example, that we in Iran, our breakfast is noon sangak and paneer and chai, whereas the French have their croissant and coffee? Is there a basis to the way we have our breakfast, to the way that we eat a big lunch and a small dinner? Is there something cultural about that? Can you maybe enlighten us if you have that information?
Well, I think that's true, and there's a lot of changes, like in recipes that we had many years ago in Iran compared to what we have now. And one of the main reasons is about the scarcity of the ingredients that you cannot find easily nowadays, and you need to substitute and replace them with the other items. However, it really depends on the person, and for us, we try to be loyal to the originality of food as much as possible while we're introducing new items and new ingredients in our food. So there should be a balance, So if we can get that balance, and if we can go forward with that balance, so it can be like something that which I can say, it can refer to the past, and also something which has been modernized and managed with a new expectation.
It's a difficult question, because I don't consider myself an authority on Persian culture and food, but I can just say that I know what I like to eat, and so for approaching the breakfast element, certainly within dindin we offer noon barbari, morabba, chai, and then we also offer croissants and porridge, because that's what we're catering to. In terms of lunch and people eating a lot for lunch, I think the lifestyle in the UK is that people are living more faster-paced lives and they don't have any time. So that notion of sitting and sort of having a sofra and enjoying lunch for lengthy hours just doesn't exist anymore. So we don't have that luxury. So if people want to grab and go, we need to adapt those dishes so that they're servable in that fashion, so that the sort of busy consumer doesn't miss out on that, and sort of gets some exposure to something new.
Talking about breakfast, though, there was one thing that we've served, I don't know if you've had it before, but it's date omelettes in bread. That was something that we've tried out, and we weren't sure if people would like it or not, but they're really starting to come round to that idea of having the egg with the sweet dates and having that as a breakfast.
add bacon to it. It becomes
really?
magical.
Oh, I'll try that.
Tomorrow.
I just wondered what you, the panel, are telling me why there is this sudden, really explosion of interest in Iranian food. I came to London in '67, a long time ago, and I think I have always been interested in foods from all over the world. There was, as far as I remember, only one Persian restaurant in Kensington. Why? And it only has changed, I would say, in the last 7, 8 years. And suddenly there are so many. We live in Chiswick, and in Chiswick alone we have about 10 different Persian restaurants.
Really?
I'm going to move
I'm
there.
very happy with it because I'm married to an Iranian, so I'm very pleased about that. But he's an excellent cook, and he can judge how good or not so good it is. How do you explain it? Why is there suddenly this really great interest?
I'd like to say it's because we've opened. But I think, I mean, there's always been Persian restaurants, but they've been family-owned restaurants. You know, often opened by immigrants that came over, their wife could cook, and they opened restaurants. I think there's always been quite a few, but the focus of the food has always been different, and there's some great Persian restaurants in Chiswick. But I'd like to say that the surge in sort of interest really has come in the last 12 months.
Yeah, I'd say that's
And Sabrina Ghayour has helped that a lot.
Yeah. Her book Persian is just, you know, really big now, and it's getting a lot of press attention, and I think that helps all of us.
Yeah, I think there's a new move in the market so that people tell, so people like Vida or Maryam, so we, or myself, so we're trying to give a new image of the Iranian cuisine.
Yeah.
And so I would say like in the last 2 years, 3 years, or maybe even 12 months, we can see people like Sabrina that they're trying very hard just to introduce Iranian food. And also we see like the celebrity chefs these days that they focus on Iranian foods and Iranian ingredients and try to use like the Iranian recipes.
What's for instance. Yeah.
So, which is good. I think it's a great movement, but we should be very also careful that we shouldn't just label a food Iranian, so call it Iranian while it's not really Iranian, it's not loyal to the origin. So for us who are Iranian, so I think it's a responsibility just to work on this and get the balance right.
But also I think Persian food has influenced Western cooks for centuries.
Yeah.
I just think it's come to the forefront now.
I mean, looking at, talking about celebrity chefs, there's also a really good documentary for Guy Bourdain, the CNN documentary he did about the Iranian food and how unexpected it was when he went there and how amazing it was and the contradictions of the flavors, and things like that are all helping as well, and just raising the knowledge and raising the influence. But it can only help having more people like or you two with us as well, and especially with social media and digital, to be able to get that word across, I think.
Yeah, I think that documentary is a great documentary.
Really good.
Yes, I see hands. Vesta?
Sussan, I was very intrigued to hear that in the Safavid period, the food started with fruit and sweet, cooked cakes. Is that the reason why we, to this day in Iran, serve before dinner fruit and cakes? And it was always a mystery to me why we do that, because usually in the West you start the other way around. Is that the reason?
One has to imagine that that's the reason, because it's not the method of eating. The sequence is different in European cuisines, and neither is it what the Chinese and Indians do. So it must be particular to the Iranian taste for the fruits and the sweets to precede the main meal. And I bet you if some clever physicians and researchers study this, they'll find out there's good reason to do it. But, that's not...
I always thought it was because Iranians eat and then leave straight away. So
they have the dessert before. That's a very good one. But the Safavid feast, they sat. So the drinking actually was after eating, which has another very interesting logic to it, that you drank after you have eaten everything, and then they were drinking into the night. People couldn't walk out of these feasts anymore.
Was it drinking alcohol or?
Of course, it's wine.
Wine.
Of course.
After dinner.
After dinner, then would come the wine drinking, and some of the Europeans actually complain about the fact that they have to sit until midnight or past midnight, keep drinking, because the Shah is drinking. You can't leave halfway through. It's a very interesting part of it. Yes, I see, but here I have behind you, there's Astrid, could you? Thank you.
How much are you cooking with your food?
Dry fruit?
Yeah.
I think a lot.
A lot, in stews and soups, in our ash, in our stews, in our rices, like barberries, prunes.
What the Iranian they call the
aloo, exactly.
Iran cooking a lot of fruit, particularly with the dry.
Yes.
So how much are you cooking?
Very much. I mean, it's very much part of our main courses, our soups, all our stews. Yeah, we have a good representation of.
As Iran, food been influenced by a lot of different countries, obviously. Yeah. During the 2,000 years onward, every people coming in and grow something and take something away. So I just want to know how much you are influencing other countries.
Well, Iranian cuisine, as you said, has always been influenced and was influential to the neighboring countries. And I think that's why there are a lot of ingredients from different countries that we use in our cooking. And as Vida said, dried food is among one of them, and I think all of us, we're using a lot of dried foods, like in the cooking that we have. Like, for example, for us, barberries or always, when we say that's one of our dishes on a weekly basis, and we use them. And yeah.
The gentleman back there. Yes, thank you.
Two questions for the panel, one on the historic perspective, and one on the modern cooking, Persian cooking. The historic one, I'm curious, when did rice become a staple dish? You suggested during the Safavids it was a dish in its own right, rather than the basis staple diet. And on the current Persian cooking, Asghari. So last time I was there, I took some friends and ordered some biryani for them. The guy shouted at table for 3 heart attacks, please. So, having said that, I am vegetarian and I have no problem in Iran with espinach, bamiya, sabzi, all of those work wonderfully. So my question, you guys are almost, you're starting with a blank canvas as far as the non-Iranian community is concerned in introducing our food, and you've done a great job, as we can see in the press. To what extent are you positioning Iranian food as healthy, herbal, as opposed to the Lebanese, which is oily, or the Indian, which is much more about meat and processing stuff that no one else can use?
I think Iranian cuisine is a very healthy option, and as I said, if you look at the recipes that we have, so especially in these days that people are cautious about like having the gluten-free diets or the dairy diets, so you can see like rice as one of the options that people can go for that, rather than just going for wheat or for pasta, which is very common, like in the, for example, Italian recipes. Also, as I mentioned before, so foods with fruits and vegetables. So these are the options that make them healthy. So if somebody can introduce them properly and acknowledge people about how Iranian cuisine can be healthy, I think that's a great move, because I believe among the other foods in this country or anywhere else, Iranian cuisine are among the healthiest ones.
Yeah, I think it's all about superfoods as well now, isn't it, at the moment? Everyone talks about super. In Iranian food, we do have a lot of superfoods in our ingredients. And it's quite easy to just highlight those things like zereshk and walnuts and all the different like spinach and things like that. They're all just there, that we've taken for granted almost, but some cuisines have to adapt to those ingredients, whereas we don't have to. We've got them in our, in our manual. So we've got such a wide variety of ingredients that we can pick and choose from. I think we're quite lucky.
I mean, for us, the premise on which our food is based is really first and foremost health, and the fact that it's freshly produced daily. So it's authentic home cooking, but produced daily in-house. We're competing within the fast casual restaurant space, and when you're trying to compete with the likes of Pret and Itsu, that pride itself on providing choice and healthy choices to customers. As an industry, we're facing the fact that we have to do calorie counting, and that legislation-wise will be in place next year, along with new allergen legislation that's coming into effect next week. So things like gluten and all the 14 allergens that the government has now decided needs to be disclosed by all food vendors, restaurants, is really transforming the landscape of food operators, and is an absolute nightmare.
My father-in-law's celiac, he's got celiacs, and so actually Iranian food is one of the only things he can eat without worry. He can come round and he knows he can have the majority of the food on the table without even having to worry about flour or anything.
On the historical question, we know that rice was introduced into Iranian cuisine by or after the Mongol invasions. As many other things the Mongols did, they sort of took the whole Pan-Asian perspective and brought things back and forth across Asia. That it becomes a staple is much later, and you have to distinguish between lower grains of rice and higher grains of rice. And polo, we still understand polo to be a different thing than kate, and that mix of rices, not just plain white rice, but the mix of rices with fruits and nuts, is really what historically seems to be foregrounded in the Safavid period. From earlier periods, we don't hear about rice dishes as such. We hear about side of horse being brought in and then cut. These are descriptions of Clavijo, a Spanish ambassador to the court of Tamerlane, where he talks about how horse meat was brought in large vats, mainly of leather, and that many men would carry this, and then they would by hand cut them apart and put them onto different people's dishes. So this refinement of rice making is about polo and about mixed rices, and it really seems to come to the foreground in this Safavid period. But it's different from kate as the staple, and I think we all still recognize that polo is majlisi, that you make it in a particular way for guests and so forth. That is still very much what is the daily practice anyhow.
But also the process of the way that we do rice and we cook the rice means that we wash the starch away, so it is effectively healthier than it would be in any other.
And Iranian rice making is the only method that takes this two-step process. There's no other rice that is cooked that way, so it does have that distinctive flavor to it. You had a question. Yes, please.
Yes. As you mentioned about the tahdig is very popular among all my friends, non-Iranian. They like tahdig very much, and I'm not really good on making tahdig. Maybe if you can explain how to make really nice tahdig.
Maybe the recipe can be shared at some point. I think we all find ourselves failing when we don't make that tahdig come through.
It needs a lot of butter.
A lot of butter.
Yeah, butter helps.
And they like very much pheasant.
Pheasant is very popular.
Amazing.
Very much.
It was on Saturday Kitchen as well, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Sabrina was cooking on Saturday Kitchen pheasant, and just seeing the chefs and Marcus Waring saying how amazing it was. It was nice to see that. Did you wake up on Saturday?
I'd like to give the last the last one to one of our chefs.
The panelists and especially Vida, where do you guys see the future of Iranian food in this market outside Iran? And do you think that one day Iranian food will be as popular as the Japanese, for example, itsuyo sushi, or the Mexican burritos that I always pass in the city and I see queues and people go crazy for this wrap of
I think it probably has the greatest potential of any cuisine to date. I think I leave it really to Jamie Oliver, who did a program about 4 or 5 years ago on Channel 4, and he went, I think, to Bedford to see a family-run restaurant, and he said it wouldn't surprise me if in 20 years' time Persian food is the next fish and chips.
Thank you. So I want to invite you to join me in thanking the panelists here.